Greetings, leadership students of Management 1010 Interdisciplinary Leadership. So we've just completed our first assignment with 12 o'clock high, and I have posted your grades. Please do go back through if I have given you a feedback file. This is where I kind of go in and make comments as I read your work, and I do read it, as you'll see. As we went through this is your first assignment, and I definitely take that in mind, and I try to grade leniently. So, some of you may not think so. However, we did have, I want to say it was 4 students in this class that earned perfect scores, and great job to you. Very proud of you. Now, one of the reasons that I give you feedback is because we're going into our second video assignment where and that is for the movie Hotel Rwanda, which I will warn you in advance can be a little bit of a difficult movie to watch. But can you imagine being a leader in this movie, which is what Paul Rusesabagina, if I said that right, I don't have it in front of me, was. So it is a true life story, and I think we all wish that we had the courage that Paul shows in this movie. So I think you'll find it very moving, but not for small children, okay? Okay, now, speaking of leadership and the leader that you're going to see in the next movie, and speaking of 12 o'clock high and the feedback that I want to give you, there is an important point that I believe I mentioned as we went through the syllabus, but it's probably a good time to kind of drive this home. You got to remember that you're not being asked to watch the movie as you would be in, for example, a literature or a film class, okay? We are watching it because we're observing the actors who are portraying leadership styles, because that's what we studied in Chapter 1 is leadership styles. I asked you to assess your leadership style, gave you the opportunity to talk about that, and then of course you were looking at the leadership styles of Commander Savage and Commander Davenport, and I hinted to you to pay close attention to the names, and we're going to go through some of these questions real quickly. And of course, Commander Davenport, well, what is a Davenport? A Davenport is a sofa, soft, cushy, right, comfortable. And of course, Commander Savage, we probably don't need to think too hard about that. Savage, tough, right, brutal maybe. Okay, so let's go through some of these. The first thing I did is to ask you to assess your leadership style. Most of you agreed. A couple of you said, well, I am a little like this with my family, but I'm a little like this when I'm at work. And that's normal, that's natural. I was very impressed, and this goes to one of my points to you, with those of you who looked at your book and said, based on the descriptions of these styles, I could see that I was a little bit this style as well as this. In other words, you didn't just toss it out there and say, yeah, okay, whatever. You gave some depth to it. Now, here's my point on this. This is a college credit leadership course, and so I need you to always demonstrate, I've used that word with you before, but I want to really drive it home today, demonstrate that knowledge that you are acquiring. First, you're gaining knowledge from the textbook, and you definitely need to demonstrate that you have done the reading, and more importantly, that you are not simply regurgitating that information. You get it. These are leadership concepts. How can you apply those in your life? How can you, develop a little bit of a mastery? I don't think any of us are perfect, but master some skills if you're not internalizing that. And that's what I'm looking for, is for you to really say, I didn't just read it and I'm writing it back to you, but I got it, I see it. How do you do that? Because you talk about how you saw those things in the movie. Remember that these actors are portraying what we've studied, and that is again going to be the case as you watch Hotel Rwanda as we continue through the chapters. I think that one aligned with chapter 3, right? Okay, now the first place where you're moving beyond assessing yourself, but going into saying, well, what did you observe in Commander Davenport? What did you observe in Savage? And I'm giving you the pros and cons. Some of you did quite well on this, but some of you listed Davenport and Savage as having the exact same leadership styles, and that was certainly not the case. Okay, so I was kind of looking for that. Now, I did allow a little flexibility here because Davenport didn't take the test and show you his results, right? I realize that you're assessing it from afar, but at the same time, I think it's not difficult to say, is Davenport an extrovert or an introvert? I mean, did he go to the bar? Did he hang out with his people? Did he talk to them? Might be an E. How about Savage? Did he make his plans kind of in private, right? He didn't care if the people liked him. Just something to think about. Okay, now, identify the bomber group's mission and identify at least 2 problems. Now, again, I'm looking at this from a leadership perspective. When you are leading people, it is to accomplish a task at hand. I don't know that if you asked FedEx what their mission is, if they would say, deliver packages. Right? I think there would be a little bit AutoZone. We sell parts. I think there's more to it than that. I don't think that you would catch Fred Smith or Pitt Hyde giving such a nonchalant answer. So it's important to develop that. Now, by develop that, I don't need a technical breakdown of what they were doing, but there were some obstacles here. They were being asked ultimately to fly a night mission very close to the ground. In fact, the night mission there at the end was the big one. They suffered the loss, but they were being asked to do very, very difficult maneuvers. And when I say identify at least 2 problems, think about the start of the movie, okay, and think about leadership, and that is the most important thing. Unfortunately, some folks really focused in on 2 problems that were not leadership related. Well, now we're in a leadership class here, and you've got to demonstrate your knowledge of the leadership styles. And if we had to identify, even from a film review or a literature perspective, this movie, we would certainly not start talking about whether or not the airplanes work, because that was not the problem. The military has airplanes, okay? We had a leader that was replaced. When would the military do that? Well, did the guy get promoted? Nope, it was not a promotion. He must have been ineffective, and that was certainly addressed in the movie. So as you think about what's going on here, many of you correctly said, and if you are not one of these folks, you want to pay heed here, there was a lack of discipline. The guys were partying. It was a good time. They were relaxed. They were hanging out at the bar with Davenport, but this was not a well-trained crew. Now, some of you said, okay, in addition to the lack of discipline, it was, the poor leadership. Other great responses, lack of confidence. We think that it's great for us when people are soft on us, don't we? We say, oh, it's so good. That was an easy A in that class. But I wonder if you asked yourself how confident you were in your knowledge from that class, if you would feel as positively. Would you feel that great? If you had let's just say a math teacher, and you wrote down 2 + 2 is 27. Well, your math teacher goes, oh, that's so great, that's wonderful. Well, really, do you have that confidence? You would say to them, well, is that the right answer? No, not at all. Well, I think you would not feel confident. You might feel good. You might be happy that you got an A because you would, deceive yourself, right, to be happy about it. But you would not be confident in your skill because you don't have a skill. So that was the case here with the bomber group. Davenport was, making them feel good, and he was pumping them up, and they were enjoying this great relationship. But unfortunately, they had lost confidence in their skill to fly. And so just even to think about it was causing them, lots of angst, right? Okay, now, I give you a pretty long explanation here that very oftentimes when we have a really strong strength, that strength can also be our weakness, right? You know, I've seen athletes, for example, who say, you know, I'm right-handed and so my right arm is really well developed, or my right leg, and they have to work extra hard on their left side, for example, to build dexterity and to build strength, because the fact that they're, you know, so reliant on one side of their body, even though that part of their body is very strong, is also their weakness, right? That is definitely can be a flaw in leadership if we are not balanced as we go into this, okay? So, most of you correctly said with Davenport that his strength was his relationship. He knew how to build relationship with his people. Some of the words you used were things like loyalty and kindness, and he was patient, and he definitely was all those things. He knew their families' names, and he knew all kinds of details about them. It was relationship that he was good at. Now, what was the problem, though, when he needed them to go out and run a mission? He was so caught up in that relationship that he would not risk them being mad at him, right? He was afraid if they were mad at him that it would, you know, sever the relationship, and he couldn't stand it. So he just simply never asked, right? You know, the sad thing is because of that relationship, probably if he could have been centered enough to be authoritative, they probably would have done it for him. His men, as many of you said, were loyal to him. They were incredibly loyal to him. But unfortunately, he never asked. That was his weakness. He defaulted to the relationship, and he was subservient to the relationship factor. So he would not ask of them. Now, lots of missing the mark when it came to Commander Savage. You were all very quick and accurate to say his strength was his, you know, his command, his authority. He walked into that tent and he said, let me tell you what you're going to do, and you're going to do it. And if you don't like it, you can transfer out, right? Now, unfortunately then, what you started to then say was he didn't have the relationship, and that was his weakness. I don't know. I don't know if that's what it was. I think if you really think about what it was, and maybe I can kind of pull something up here. Let me pause this for a moment. Okay. So if you talked about relationship and that was his weakness, then first of all what you did is you switched, because I was trying to get you to talk about how the strength could simultaneously be a weakness. And so you talked about his strength being his discipline, his commanding presence, his authoritative role, you know, how tough he was with his people, and then all of a sudden you start talking about relationship. But again, remember, our strength can also be our weakness. So let me present this to you. Good leaders can be friendly with a team, right? But keep it in check without an emotional breakdown. In other words, there are many leaders who will say, let's go out on Friday afternoon, or let's go to lunch, and let's all have a Christmas party. And then when something goes wrong, those leaders, think about Savage. He stopped functioning. He literally curled up into a little ball. Nobody talked about that. And he got on his cot and he couldn't speak anymore. Now, was he mourning? I don't know. Lots of people mourn. I don't know that they get to a point where they stop functioning. Now, some people do. It's not everybody. When they do, think about the skills that person needs. And my goal is not to offend anyone here, and so I apologize if, anyway, there's so many things I could say about that. But here's my point. Remember when he's curled up in the ball, who comes to him? It was Davenport. And did you watch the way that Davenport works with him and coaxes him and starts to bring him back out? Now, it's going to be a process, but it was Davenport who possessed those skills, and it was relationship skills. There was a soft-hearted kindness that Davenport was using, and that was so necessary, and that was Davenport in his element, right, in his strength. But many tough leaders, let me get back on track, bond with their people and are successful. Consider a doctor. They work so closely with their patient, right? And then the patient dies, a heart attack, cancer, whatever it happens to be. The doctor is human. The doctor mourns. He's sad. She's sad. That's a tough thing for that person to go through, for many of us to go through as we lose loved ones, right? Now, in contrast, Savage was not simply mourning. He was devastated. He was wrecked. He couldn't get out of bed. He lost his ability to function as a human. Okay, he wasn't coming back. This wasn't that he was going to curl up in the bed for a day or two. This is not the situation. If you've lost someone and you're saying, well, I was really sad and I felt like, no, this is not that. This is somebody who was not coming back. Okay, they were stuck in that curled up ball position. If we checked back with Savage 2 years from now, he'd still be on the cot. Okay, Savage, here's why. Savage took that responsibility seriously. He drove those men to be successful because he was responsible for their success. He's in charge. He's in command. It's his discipline. It's his rule. When I say jump, you say how high, and I know the right height to tell you to jump, right? I'm the leader. I am the knowledge base. I'm the power source. It's me, right? So when they failed, what does that say about him? Who is he going to hold responsible? Because they were at this time doing everything he told them to do. Now, it would be different if in the beginning he had told them to do stuff and they didn't do it. Then he was saying, you know what? We have had people that die, and that was because they were not trained. But I'm going to train you, and so this is not going to happen, right? But that's not the case at the end of the movie. They had done everything he asked. In his mind, for this reason, it must be his fault. In his opinion, a better leader would not have led his people to this failure. It is extremely personal. In his mind, he caused all this. Now, here's where if I docked a point, it depended in this area how much you supported your claim. And going back to the things that you're going to need to do for the next paper, I want you to be bold when you make statements and claims. I want you to say, this is it, and that is it, and this is what happened, and yes it is, and no it isn't. I don't want you to wind up and be soft and mushy and say probably, kind of, sort of, well, I think, and maybe, possibly. You don't have to do that. Make the statement. In academia, you can certainly do that because you're going to support your statement with examples from the movie and with references to your textbook. According to I'm just going to pull Greenleaf, one of the authors in your book. This is a quality, and I saw this quality in the movie. Do you see what I'm saying? So you say, I believe this. This is the case, and the reason I know this is the case is because I read this in the textbook. Here's what I read, and this is where it was demonstrated in the movie. You see how those two things tie together? I'm sorry for going on, but I hope this helps you and to keep doing better and better. Okay, so in his opinion, now here's where the relationship element comes in. When I say I graded leniently, I did because like I said, it depended on what you told me and how you supported your thoughts. He did not have the skills to forgive himself. So if he had some relationship there, if he had some of those people skills, then he could then say, I'm only human and people make mistakes, or they're only human and people make mistakes, but he did not have the skills to do that. So he has this influx of emotion. He is absolutely being rained down with emotion, and he is so used used to this authoritarian, mastery, knowledgeable lifestyle that there's not a place in his world for that, okay? So that's where he became emotional. You will see this in people sometimes. One of the first layoffs I've been through, and if you've gone through that, then you know what that's like. I had a boss I worked very closely with. I had two bosses. And this boss was a real taskmaster, but I liked him because he pushed me to achieve at a really high level, and you always knew where you stood because he said, this is what I want, and and it was that authoritarian style. And when layoffs come, it was kind of like a death. It was like, you watch people you've worked alongside for a long period of time, you watch them leave, and it is sad. And his reaction, this particular boss, was to just stay in his office. He didn't come out of his office. It was a really difficult time for him because of this influx of emotion. In contrast, I had another boss who, it was really hard to understand what he wanted. He wanted to be nice and friends and wonderful, but unfortunately because of that, he had a difficult time accomplishing objectives. His department was not one of the high achieving departments, thus we got laid off. Okay, but when the layoffs happened, he was everywhere. What do you need? How can I help you? How is your wife, your husband, your son, your daughter? He knew everybody's name, right? Emotion was his wheelhouse. That was his specialty. And in Savage's case, it was not. So his dominance in that one strength left a gap in the others. I would say 98% of you were dancing around that particular issue. But I wanted just to add a little bit more to that, because I think the part that was missing was that he was holding himself responsible in the same way that he commands others. When you hold others to a level of perfection, then what do you do to yourself? You inadvertently hold yourself to that same level of perfection. Right? And he missed it, and he realized that he had missed the mark of perfection because 100% of his people did not come home. Okay? So I hope this was helpful. As you now move into Hotel Rwanda and you're reading your chapters 2 and 3, and you've got some due dates coming this week, you're learning the concepts in the online quizzes, but you're applying those concepts as we watch the movie. As you answer the questions, I need to see evidence of that. I don't want you to let me fill in the blanks because I am notoriously bad at doing that. I never see it in the way that you are not telling me. Does that make sense? In other words, if you leave me to fill in the blank, I typically don't fill it in the way that you would want. And in fairness, what that does, when you don't explain the thought, then I am grading myself. Because if you want me to fill in the blank, then I'm going to fill it in obviously with what I'm looking for. Now, I believe that to some extent that's what you want me to do, and that is not acceptable because we're not here to grade me, we're here to grade you. And so what you want to do as you watch is you just want to make sure that you explain it to me. Now let me hear, you heard that, hear this. Explain it to me, don't over-explain it to me. You can be brief. You can be concise. I am not looking for 20 pages, couple paragraphs. Some students are really good and can write it in 1 or 2 sentences. Most students cannot. If you are not clear and concise as you write your 1 or 2 sentences, then you may find that you did not provide evidence from the textbook in your reading, the author, the value, the definition, the whatever you're going to, you probably didn't explain that well, and you may not be adequately explaining the example that you saw in the movie. Keep balancing the ability to support your claim, your statement, good leaders can be friendly. That's a claim. I support that with my example of the doctor. Do you see how I'm doing that? Okay, so you can do that too. If you find that you are repeating the entire movie to me, then you may be talking a little bit too much. on that. Okay, so it's tough to achieve that balance. I do understand that, and that's why I'm giving you this feedback, this guidance, and I think you'll do a good job. So keep up the good work. Many of you did very well on this assignment, and a lot of these points you were very on target for. So keep up that good work. You know, as we continue throughout the semester, obviously I'm going to look for you to implement what I tell you in these feedback videos. So thanks, and I hope you're enjoying this wonderful weather, and we are just going to keep on moving through the course content. And we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.